Hi, everyone. Welcome back along to the show. Today, I have with me Antony Marlow. Antony is one of the data strategists here at Cynozure and also leads our data management practice. He's been previously a chief data officer in industry and a great career in data, in change, in program leadership. And Antony's here to talk about change and its impact on organizations, and obviously particularly related to the work we do in data. So, Antony, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming along.
Thank you, Jason, for having me on the show. Looking forward to it.
No problem at all. So yeah, let's get kicked off. So I obviously introduced you as one of the brilliant team we have here at Cynozure. But yeah, do you want to give a bit of background about you and your life in data? Would be great.
Yeah, sure. So my background started more years than I care to mention now, probably heading towards 20 years, sad to say. But yeah, I started out life as a business analyst and project manager. One of those FTSE 250 organizations where you dual hatted. It was a small
Mm,
capability, so you mixed your skill set there. But it was really interesting for me because I came fresh out of university with a degree in software engineering, so a technical role. And one of the things I really enjoyed about that role was actually getting to work with end users and the business. And it's
right.
probably on the back of that that really led me down the path of data rather than perhaps technology as well. So that was the kind of the outset for me. I stayed
Mhm.
with that large corporate for quite a long time, accelerated through different roles and responsibilities, supported change and improvement initiatives across that time, generally with that data bent as well, before culminating in a role where I was supporting as the lead on data for digital transformation. So again, back into the role that data has, technology also has as well, but thinking about data and what implications that had for an organization and how it would move into the future.
That
On the
that role of business analyst and project manager,
yeah,
that was where I cut my teeth straight out of uni, also about 20 years ago. And
yeah,
I always, in some ways that and it's not quite making a renaissance, but that kind of
mm,
role of business analyst where you're understanding, unpicking a business, finding problems, writing out processes, working out how things work, designing
yeah,
how new things should work is such brilliant kind of foundational training about business and how stuff works in the world.
yeah,
I wish
absolutely.
there'd be more of it.
I couldn't agree more because it's about how stuff works, and the other thing, my passion is all about making things better and improving things.
Yeah.
So obviously, when you start to understand something and you work with people, and a lot of them, the people you work with, and you'll know this, Jason, as well, is they often have the answers. So
Mm,
what you are actually doing in your role is just enabling that
yeah.
change that people are describing or innovating themselves. So yeah, it's exciting. I think the other thing for me that I really enjoyed about anything we do with data, but also from those early days of business analysis, is about something with a purpose. So it's
Mm,
about building something, a new capability. Obviously, we talk about data and products now, but something with a purpose that's for an outcome, and that's what really excited me, and still excites me now.
yeah. And I mentioned it, but I don't think then you sort of pick back up is
Mm,
the sort of your move into sort of data strategy as a sort of a capability, sorry,
yeah,
and then also sort of being a chief data officer, because that
yeah.
obviously comes with some of that experience in understanding business and transformation and program leadership and building teams and all that good stuff. Did you find that kind of move into sort of defining strategy and being chief data officer a natural progression from the work you'd done?
I think so, because one of the things I found that depending on where you sit in either change and improvement and innovation, and when you deliver these things in an organization, are you at the point where you're actually designing, creating? Are you instigating, designing, creating that change, setting out
Mm,
the foundation? It's almost like architecture, isn't it? Designing
yeah,
what the outcome is going to be. It's really exciting. Or are you further down that life cycle where you're inheriting stuff? And I'd spent a lot of time in my career where I was inheriting things that I thought, quite frankly, could have been done better. That's always the case, isn't it? You want to
yeah,
be at the start. So when I kind of got to that leadership role, and then when I stepped back into outside of industry into consulting, it was actually about creating those broad brushstrokes about what is the art of the possible, what
yeah.
can we design, what can we make better, what we
Mm,
learn.
mm. Great. Well, all of that points to, when we talk about making things better, you're talking about
Yeah.
innovation, talking about doing things differently. That leads really nicely onto this topic of change. And is that it is in this data space, do you find, and building data products and running data programs, do you find that change does it have to happen, or actually does it happen by mistake? Do we have to force it? Do you know what I mean? Where does change play a part
Yeah.
in data as a whole?
Oh, that's a multifaceted question, isn't it? So for me, absolutely change is an implication because we are making changes through the things I think that we produce and create. We're all about, moving the dial on what we do, even if
Mm,
that's just a very small incremental change, whether it's a very discrete data product, for example, or some output that we're creating for an individual, versus maybe making a much more fundamental change to something that's going to have an impact to a team or a function or to a combination of those things. So probably thinking about the impact and size of the change that's going to come.
mm,
But I would argue that if what we are doing is not changing anything, then what value is it really adding
mm.
to anybody, to a business, to organization, to an individual?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess the outcome of data is about making a decision, and that decision normally creates some kind of change. I suppose the decision might be not to make a change, but
Sure.
normally we're trying to make some kind of adjustment, improvement, and that normally creates change. But I think also there's that whole, um, in order to become a business that can do data well, can make
Yeah.
changes, make better decisions, that also normally requires some change. So the input needs some change, and then the output drives some change. So it kind of feels like we're wrapped in this kind of space where change is a sort of a constant, or at least something that we need to be really conscious of.
Yeah, completely so. I mean, it's almost a bit like Inception, the movie, isn't it? It's change within change.
Yeah, right.
If the concept, we're changing how we operate and we want to instigate a change in what we deliver for other people. So I completely agree with that. And I think what it's really important of those things is about making it tangible to people as well,
Yeah.
because I'm sure we'll get onto that conversation later. There is the fear of change and the implications of change. So when we think about
Mm.
what it means to people, for example. Um, but you're right. I think without going off on too many rabbit holes, because I think we can in this conversation, Jason. I think for example, you take something like what Matthew Say talks about in Black Box Thinking, being a learning organization.
Mm.
You're receptive to change, if you're going to learn from something, from what data perhaps is telling you,
Yeah.
insight, for example, or when shaping it forward about predicting and acting on that from decisions, you've got to be receptive to
Yeah.
the data and to changing, and that can be uncomfortable for people.
Talking of, I suppose, that change and it making people uncomfortable or not, that
Mm.
probably comes from the impact or the size of the change. So is the scale of change, um or does it always need to be transformational in one big, we talk about transformational change, we talk about,
Yeah.
and then at the other end of the spectrum we talk about sort of iterative small change. um is scale important in terms of change, and
Yeah.
if so, how does that impact on the organization depending on that sort of scale of change?
Well, certainly there's a scale factor, isn't there? And I guess it's the approach to what you're implementing. So, in my career and experience, and I'm sure lots of listeners here as well, it all depends on the context of what's happening in an organization.
Yeah.
So there might be lots of business as usual improvements where we're perhaps refining something that already exists or creating something that could be quite discrete. So small change here being perhaps providing data or changing the behaviors and the management of data. So it's not just about producing new artifacts, it's also about maybe people are producing data that's leveraged. Think
Mm,
about data management. So are we changing something at an individual basis or a team basis? Is that a small scale because it's incremental change or part of a continuous improvement program through lean or some familiar methodology?
mm,
So I've worked on those kind of initiatives where it's incremental change that's perhaps demand that's coming into a team on a daily, weekly basis. And then you've also got the other end of the scale. You could be on a digital transformation program, and you are fundamentally changing everything about the organization. So we talk about, don't we, Jason, in data strategy, you have to think about the target operating model of perhaps the data function. How's it going to work in the future?
mm.
on a really large scale transformation program, it's that next level again, where are you making a fundamental change to the whole operating model? So is there a digital transformation? Are you taking away manual process? And there are digital alternatives to how a business might function.
Mm,
So clearly there's that kind of incremental level of scale.
mm,
I think there are constants within that though, and it all ends up, I think, back to people, isn't it? Which is whether you're changing the world of an individual or a team of people or a function of people or an entire department, division, or business, you could be creating that fear factor of something new. So I think that's part of what, as data leaders, we need to think about the
mm,
implications of what we look to introduce. I think the other thing about this as well is not just making a change once. One of the things that we talk about is the stickiness factor, and that's
mm.
been really important to what we want to do from data strategy.
Yeah.
So, we work and support clients on developing a data strategy, and we want that to be a living, breathing, evolutionary piece of work that's just the start of their journey, or perhaps it's accelerating their journey if they're further down the track.
Yeah.
The same thing with change, isn't it?
Yeah. You it's not change and go. It's change and then work to make sure that either that change sticks or you continue
Yeah.
to change until you land up in a place that is right. I just want to come back to transformation again.
Mm.
Like you positioned those sort of those ends of a spectrum, like large
Yeah.
transformation where lots needs to change, and
Mm.
small discrete kind of iterative change.
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan. I'm a huge fan of change, and I think it might be an illness of mine. I love change. I love new things. I love tweaking things, changing things, making things better all the time.
Yeah.
But I'm also a really big fan of sort of almost like, and maybe it's because of this, always on iterative change. So constant chip away at changes and improvements that people can more easily buy into. You can see that the outcome quite quickly. You can
Yes.
assess whether it's having the kind of desired effect. But I don't think that that's the opposite of transformation, because all of those little changes add up to be transformative potentially, but it might just take 10, 20, 30 little changes to get to transformation.
Yeah.
So I kind of have a bit of I'm just interested in your view on the word transformation and what it really means, because there's changing lots of stuff all in one go, which is I think
Yeah.
what people mean by transformation. And then there's the outcome of what you do being transformative. And I don't think those things are necessarily um opposites of each other. Just sort of, they're kind of coming at it a slightly different way. Have you got a view on that?
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? Because transformation means so many things to so many people.
Yeah.
The concept of digital transformation means so many things to so many different
Right.
people. I think for me, when I think about transformation and where there's a flip between the two, because you're right, when you talk about iterative, incremental improvement versus big bang, that's more about an approach.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily about the culmination of what you've got to at the end.
Mm.
Um, I don't think it's any hard and fast rule, but the way I think about it, and when I think about what we do as data professionals, is about, are the changes we are making, so are the data products we are changing, for example, developing and supporting people with, or maybe changing behaviors and approaches about data management, you know, how much of an impact does that have on the four business architectural elements? So thinking about what the constituent parts of any organization, your people, your process, your technology, and obviously what we're passionate about is data, being the glue that generally binds those other three things together. So when I think about transformation, are we really pulling all the other levers on? There's going to be quite a significant process change, maybe
Mm.
refinement, optimization, re-engineering of process. Are we fundamentally changing people's roles, responsibilities, their capabilities? Do we need to invest in them in terms of training, briefing, all those kind of aspects?
Mm.
And then implications for technology is about, how much of a change does data instigate, perhaps, which might lead to some developments or procurement of technology in support of
Yeah.
optimization too. So I guess that's a bit of a threshold for me on, are we doing something that might have it's a bit like a ripple effect, isn't it? It's going to have a small ripple effect, which will make a positive improvement, might take, one thing we talk about change is about the stickiness factor and changing behaviors. So it becomes a habit, so it's about giving somebody something that's going to help them, and they're going to continue to use it rather
Mm.
than it'll last 5 minutes and get us run in the bin and we're back to our old ways of working. But for me, it's all about how much of implication it has on all those other elements.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. And yeah, I guess the, as you say, that ripple effect is interesting. Yeah, you're making a ripple, or are you making a, throwing the rock in the pond instead, and it's huge
Yeah.
splash. I guess either way, whether it's let's say big impactful multifaceted change, or small incremental discrete change, either way that impacts on those facets of an organization you mentioned, but certainly the people aspect.
Yeah.
Because generally in organizations, in business, people are the driving force. Yes, there's technology, but people interact with technology 9 times out of 10. So
Yeah.
how does change, or what's your experience with change impacting individuals, and what are some of those challenges with making it happen? Because people often talk about change being hard, certainly at scale.
Yeah.
Why is that from a people perspective?
I think there's the well-known things, and I think we'll talk about again as well. What can we learn from professionals in the change space as too? But for me, it's that classic thing of who wants change? Everyone sticks their hands up. Who wants to change? One hand goes up.
Yeah,
There is the fear
mine
factor.
mine will always go up.
Exactly, and then
I'm
you're a
just
room
just
of
a
people going, "No."
lunatic who wants change all the time.
Absolutely. So I think there's the fear factor of the unknown. There's a few things here at play that I think we can just, as leaders, whether we're data leaders of any type, leaders that we should be
Yeah.
considering. So there will be a fear factor. It's the unknown. What does the
Mm,
future look like? So can we articulate what the desired future looks like?
mm,
There's a point here about empowerment and enablement of individuals as well, because sometimes we get the friction, and the resistance to change because people feel disenfranchised. People
mm.
feel unempowered.
Right.
So how can we flip that
And
around?
I guess therefore threatened by whatever this changes.
Precisely, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think also then there's that personal fear. So we're talking about people, we're talking about psychology here as well, and there's this fear factor of what does this implication mean for me personally? And again, without disappearing off into one of the many rabbit holes, when we think about data literacy or proficiency, and we're starting to increase, the data maturity, more sophisticated data products, new technologies, people perhaps don't have the skills and experience around that, what that means to their role.
Mm,
There's a piece here about training and briefing and communication. So,
mm,
you've got the classic kind of Kotter thinking, the 8 steps, but it's those 3 elements of when it comes to people principally, but just generally when you're trying to get the change embedded, it's about creating that climate for change, because quite often you're making a change for the good. So getting
mm,
people to recognize that the world ain't so great right now. And
mm,
actually we're here to help, not here to hinder.
mm.
So creating that climate of people who recognize the need for change, the desire for change,
Right.
riding that wave, getting their engagement, getting their help, and then getting them to implement alongside you. That's the ambition, isn't it? Always, it's not always the case. It's a challenge sometimes, but
Yeah, I like those, that sort of, that as a set of steps. There's that make sure people are clear why change is necessary.
yes,
Involve them with, I suppose, defining the change, but also implementing the change,
yeah,
designing what new should look like once they're bought
yeah.
into the fact that today is good. What was the third? What was the sort of the final part of that? Because I think those steps are quite clear.
Well, it's the implementation, and then
Make the
probably
change
that
happen.
point of the
Yeah,
making it sustainable,
yeah,
and part of that being when you implement, it could be we implement, not you implement. So take the people with you, make them part of
yes,
that process if
yeah,
you can.
yeah. Don't do change to people if
Exactly.
possible. It's involve people in change, and that's, I mean, that's hard, right? At
Yeah,
scale, in certainly in large, or I mean, it's hard in small organizations, to be fair, but certainly in
yeah,
large organizations when it's multiple countries, multiple business units, people pulling in different directions anyway.
yeah.
The day job getting in the way of everything. So how the hell can we change? All that good stuff. Um, that those steps are quite hard, but they are worthwhile investments, rather than the pain of change. Is worthwhile investments to make change better.
Completely. And I think alongside that as well, I think to add, Jason, would be the credibility of the change too. So,
Mm,
we talk about it through leveling up, don't we? And this is what, if you read widely on change and transformation practice, as I do, because I quite enjoy that subject, other people have other hobbies. But what people, what's recommended and we follow through leveling up is, you know, test it from a value perspective, prove the value of
yeah,
something, and then you're scaling it at that point.
yeah,
There's a rich history of change and transformation projects that have gone wrong, and there's a lot of common themes coming out of it.
yeah,
You know, the lack of there's obvious things you can do. Gone on a bit of a tangent. Getting executive sponsorship support for big change. I'm not talking about day-to-day stuff,
yeah.
but big change sponsorship, sufficient funding, but to the point of trying to do too much too fast.
Mm,
So just going back to another point I think you made as well, Jason, about creating that climate for change. In really simple English, it's all about just making it matter, make the change matter, make it meaningful to people, because no organization, wherever it is on its maturity of, how it operates as a function, how long it's been in a marketplace, how far it is along its data journey, there are always going to be issues, problems, opportunities, and people
hmm.
live with the stuff on a daily basis. So I think that's
Yeah,
part of the way we engage with people.
yeah,
Stakeholder management, stakeholder engagement, understand motivations, understand their behavior,
mm,
because another thing for me as well is about when we think about change, it always feels like we're creating a change of direction necessarily. Sometimes it isn't always about swimming against the tide here. We could be riding the wave of something that's already happening. And it's
mm,
about recognizing what's the role of what we do as data professionals in helping
yeah,
that, enabling it.
yeah. It's I mean, with anything that involves people, which is most of what we all do, it
Yeah,
understanding people, this really what we're saying. You got to understand people. You got to understand their desires, their motivation. Sorry,
yeah,
the reasons that they might fear change, the reasons they might reject change,
hmm,
and then use that to help shape the way you approach the change.
yeah,
But that off is easy to not do any of that because you've got a system you're putting in, you've got a thing that you've promised, you've got some budget that you're spending, and you just sort of like a steam train trying to just motor it all through. But you
yeah,
constantly hit these challenges, don't you, that stem back to those people fear factors that you mentioned.
yeah.
Which is why, yeah, which I suppose why it's an investment to understand those things so that you can manage your change accordingly.
Agreed. You're right. We're here. We're passionate data professionals. We believe in what we're doing, and generally, there's a trend in market that clearly, through increased maturity in data, you can unlock tangible value as long as you understand it.
Yeah,
But as we always talk about, data is a team sport, and what we create and produce to enable a business or organization is about enabling typically people and functions. So you need to take them on the journey with you. You need to make them be the champions, the sponsors, and be there to advocate what we do as well. And that could be just, again, back to the scale question, Jason, it could be influencing an individual to accept an iteration of a report or a visualization, or taking away their Excel spreadsheet and giving them something more powerful, and that being a confidence to them. But
yeah,
it's a multifaceted approach, isn't it? It's not just providing that thing for them. It's about getting advocates to support what we're doing, the champions.
yeah. Yeah, you mentioned earlier about the kind of target operating model and the
Mm.
change that I think you were sort of talking about in context of sort of big transformation, that the
Yeah.
target operating model changing. But whether it's the target operating model as a whole or elements of it or just even some processes,
Yes.
um does is that all? I don't know what the question is in terms of like, is change always needed to processes, to target operating models in order to make change happen?
Yeah.
Um, or is this something we have to do, really consciously and proactively to make sure that whatever end state look or next state or end state looks like is thought through so that we can manage that sort of transition, that
Yeah.
change, that process change quite well.
Um, um, I guess the way I would describe it is that perhaps doing process change, process engineering, or re-engineering is an opportunity. It's not necessarily a must, because I guess it all depends on the maturity of the processes. We engage with organizations who have a very liberal low maturity of processes. They're not changing very much.
Yeah.
I think it also depends on the industry you operate in as well. Is it heavily regulated or not? And therefore, there's an important piece there about making change sticky and land is also about understanding the culture, the context, and the environment that your organization works in as well.
Right.
Because there's no point creating a huge, I mean, we could flip into a conversation about data management as well, about the importance of getting something that's appropriate to an organization, something that's appropriate in terms of its scale and effort, rather than a sledgehammer to crack a nut. So the one thing I would say about if you do the implications of the process piece to me are about if we are creating something as a product that's going to generate an insight and therefore there are decisions to be had, do those decisions still exist in the same roles, responsibilities, part of the organization? Are those people properly empowered for those decisions? Because you could be giving them a very powerful tool, but have you got that powerful tool at the right decision point and decision level in your organization? The answer is no. Then clearly, then you think about changing those things.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And as you say there, technology plays a bit of a part here with well, often technology drives the need for change, or technology is used to help implement some change, or the other way around, just depending on how you approach implementing technology. But and also technology can be used to help you make change, right? So how important is technology, and when technology is involved, does this create a bigger change play, a bigger change impact?
I think it can do in terms of stickiness if you get it right, because you're baking in some of the change. If you're thinking about the procurement, perhaps, or the ongoing development of existing technology in an organization. Clearly, I think one of the implications of technology as well is that when you're instigating any change, which means a development of a system, cost implications and the time lag of those things too. So it's difficult, isn't it? I think given the nature of data as well, are we talking about data from an insight and product perspective, or are we also about producing, and data literally being the stuff that drives operational systems too? There can be changes that happen which benefit a technology in the back end, perhaps don't even make any change to the technology itself. But to your point, I think, what do we leverage? Let's just wind back to what technology is all about. It's about enablement, isn't it? It's about automation and standardization. And digitalization as well. So it's thinking about leveraging technology as much as possible to automate those kind of things, but also help manage and monitor too, I think, because that's part of the stickiness, isn't it? Because when we make a data change, it's about, we made a change, what was the impact of that change? Positive, negative, how much did it move the dial? And when you think about an organization of a certain size and scale, their data, whatever their value chain is, if they're a product business or a service business, the number of people involved in that process. So we can leverage technology to drive the workflow. And same for data, I think.
As I sort of, I suppose, baked into my question really, that about technology can be used to help manage, facilitate, and track change, and it can also be the driver for change. So as we're the world's being, what's the phrase, the world's being eaten by digital or something, by technology, and that's because it's wrapped around, and we can use it to our advantage. Just sort of raising up a level as we start to wrap up, I think it sort of strikes me that data isn't the first to have this change problem or opportunity, and the kind of the academic behind change and the research behind change, I'm guessing, I assume, has been around for a long time and continues to develop, particularly around the people element and psychology, but also just sort of how change happens best and all those good things. In data, we're not unique, are we? We're not starting from scratch in terms of how do we do change. Is this about applying known techniques, tweaking and tailoring them to the data challenge, or is there fundamental differences with how we, a chief data officer needs to think about change, or an analytic, outcome and insight, how that needs to drive some change, or can we learn from what already exists? I suppose the question is.
Yeah, well, I think that's largely true, isn't it? Because to your point, there have been a lot of change and transformation programs for many years, and there's a lot of good thinking out there. So when I think about stepping back of thinking about change transformation and thinking about that leadership role that we have in the industry, then that's part of our broader skill sets that I think we need to develop, whether we started, as I did, kind of from that space, but it's expanding that broader skill set of being a leader and therefore understanding individuals and therefore the implications of what you oversee. So you're right. There are lots of good practice. I think there's great opportunity from change professionals we can learn from. You've got the granddaddy of change in terms of John Cotter and some of his early thinking, and there are variations of what he would describe as an 8-step process. But you're right. There's a lot of collateral, a lot of learning available that I think we can absolutely leverage. And I think that even though we're still maturing as a sector, we're still in the kind of early stages. It'll help expedite and the whole maturation of data across industry, really. Perhaps we need to change a little bit so we can help change
learn from the mistakes of those that came before us and failed digital transformations and data warehouses of the past. But what are the just sort of what are the three, 5, I don't know, 10, maybe not 10. What are kind of like the biggest things then, just to wrap up? What are the biggest things when we think about it doesn't matter on the size, right? Just we need to make a change. What are kind of like the 3 things that jump to the top of your head about what people should do to help make sure change happens well?
I think for me, again, I'll liberally quote a bit of Cotter here as a starting point. He's got his 8 steps, but you can bubble that down to 3 or 4 different phases of change or transformation, whatever scale it's at, a flavor of the impact of that. So the first stage of it's all about creating that climate of change. Industry talk about maybe creating a burning platform and need, when you have something like a recession, for example, that we may be going into, and there is a massive impact to that, there's a fear factor. So it's all about behavioral change, isn't it, of individuals and peoples and groups as well, not just individuals. So, there's a fear factor, there's a crime, the climate for creating and instigating the change. So get people motivated, wanting it, receptive. That's number 1. And then it's about that engagement enablement. So trying to mitigate any fear by take them on the journey with you, get the help, because I think we need all the allies and assistance we need. Typically we are always fighting for budget and investment, and if we can get support and engagement and input from our peers, then absolutely should be leveraging that. So that's step 2. And then the third part is about that, you've got to land that change. So implement. That's perhaps the easy part. It's making it sustainable, making it sticky afterwards. So again, I think it's all about managing people. So stakeholders, how can you communicate the successes of what you've done? Be brutally honest, talk about what didn't work so well, perhaps, what you're going to learn and improve from the future. And again, I think, Jason, that point of, how do I scale this up? You can do really big change to an organization of any size, but, do a bit of the old prototyping, iteration, make it land really well, refine it, get better, then start to scale it rather than go big bang.
Yeah. Great. Well, nice takeaway steps for people to think about on how to think about change. And I noticed a thread of communication. So that I know certainly from my experience that the best way of landing change is to talk a lot, talk early, involve people, collaborate and discuss things in terms of what your plan is, what the design is, involve them in it, and then keep, as you say, take them on the journey. So that comms part is really important. But that's my takeaway from on those 4 points. But no, listen, Antony, thank you for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure to properly sit back and wax lyrical with you about change and its impact on organization. So really appreciate you coming on the show and talking about it.
No, thanks, Jason. Really enjoyed it.
Cool. And I hope everyone else did. And we'll catch you again soon.